tonight you mentioned feminism as the F word of Mexico. I feel like that still is something that it's continued to this day. Maybe not to the same extent or within the same communities, but I feel like there isn't as wide an acceptance of the movement or the attitude. And if I remember correctly in that book, there's a group of young feminists who are trying to revive Amparo Davila, who's this 80-something-year-old woman who never leaves her apartment, and she lives in this terrible part of town and all this stuff. And I was so struck by the image of these young, almost gang-like figures, these feminists, who are trying to revive or Davila or get her due to some extent. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about that gesture of this group of feminists attempting to engage this somewhat ancient, completely antisocial figure who maybe didn't want to be saved or brought out into the light. And I was very curious about that. I wonder if you could just, within that space, like.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Kit, for that question. I'm going to try two different answers. Let's see. There is this, what's his name? Of course, I had to forget the name of this writer, Halal Tufik. He wrote about something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. What is the meaning of an unsurprising disaster? And he mentioned something along the lines that once it's not one of these kind of disaster is not necessarily limited to material destruction, to destruction of buildings, lives, libraries, etc. But it's something that is really important is that even though some of these subjects might remain out there, they become unavailable to us, right? Mm-hmm. And so it takes a whole decision and some sort of mobilization to bring them back, to touch them. And for him, it was an act almost of resuscitation, just to make those meanings that might have been lost through violence, to make them available again. And it seems to me that that group of women, those young feminists in the story, were attempting something along those lines. It was, in a way, my experience. I had read Amparo Davila's when I was very young. In fact, I had time to forget that I had read her because no one ever mentioned her. It was one of these writers that you sometimes read and then you keep to yourself because her name, her work was not part of a longer conversation. And so I began writing this book about disappearances, a range of disappearances, material and immaterial. And so I thought that relationship with Amparo Davila made sense in that context. And so this group of women are trying to rescue, to bring back to life, to make that work available again. And they're facing, obviously, all the kind of challenges, material and immaterial too, involved in the whole process. It is so interesting to me that even today, it is very hard to read women, the women that have preceded us. A very important literary history of Mexico belongs to women's writing. And even though I think there are glorious efforts right now being made, and the one that comes to mind immediately is Socorro Venegas, who is a wonderful writer herself, as an editor of the UNAM, has begun this collection called Vindictas. And she's been publishing all kinds of wonderful, incredibly interesting work by women from the 50s, 60s, and onward. So I think it seems to me that one of the points that I wanted to make in the book, I think, and I'm saying this after the fact that I wrote the book, I was not so sure that I was trying to make that point when I wrote it, of course. But in talking about the actual material disappearances of women's bodies and the violence against women's bodies in Mexico, it is there is a thin line, but it is closely connected. This continuing erasing of women's words and women's experience. And so the situation of Amparo Dávila in that novel, it seemed to me there was a way of connecting that to what was happening when I wrote the novel and what is happening even today. And that's the reason why I wanted to read that poem about the feminist, because I think I owe, I think we as a society owe to this continuous mobilization a kind of language that we didn't have access to for many, many years, and just to be able to identify violence, to fight against it, to identify newer ways of solidarity, of hospitality among ourselves too. So those were my two takes on your question, Kit.